I hurried into the living room with my school bag on my back. Mom and Dad were already sitting at the table, calmly sipping their morning coffee while I quickly poured myself a bowl of cereal with oat milk. In the forest, they found another dead deer, Dad explained calmly. He glanced over from behind his newspaper. On the clearing where you used to play as children. Remember, by the old oak tree. I nodded, my mouth full and unable to say more. This had been going on for several months now. Almost weekly, sometimes even more frequently, carcasses appeared in the forest. At first, it was just hares and other smaller animals. Once, there was even a fox among them. But whatever was hunting these animals had now moved on to larger prey. Still, nobody knew what creature was causing havoc in the woods. Many were now talking about a monster. However, I had other concerns. I couldn't help but notice how Dad subtly wrinkled his nose when his gaze fell upon the carton of oat milk. Quickly, he returned his attention to the newspaper. It had been ages since Dad looked at me. Truly looked at me, his son, whom he used to be proud of. Don't get me wrong. He still did things with me. Just like before, he often took me hunting. We watched movies together on the TV and occasionally played board games with Mom, but I no longer felt that we were truly close. Not since I had decided to live as a vegan, the son of a hunter. A vegan. I could well imagine the ridicule he must face in his hunting club because of me. But that would soon change. If my plan succeeded, the others would soon admire him for his son. Then I wouldn't be the son who refused to eat the animals his father hunted, but the son who had killed the monster in the woods. My gaze fell on my wristwatch. Damn. I was running late. I have to go, I said, stuffing 2 more spoonfuls of cereal into my mouth hastily. Then I hurried into the hallway. Wait, I'll walk you to the door, Mom called after me. She caught up with me as I tied my shoes. She immediately handed me my jacket and couldn't resist taking the opportunity to ruffle my curls. I ducked away from her hand. See you later. Don't let anyone bother you, she replied, giving me her warmest smile. Love you. Love you too, I said. Then I rushed outside. I really didn't want to be late today. However, the next obstacle was already waiting for me at the door. Mrs. Richter, our neighbor. Ah, Florian. Good thing I caught you, she greeted me. She was one of those typical busybody neighbors you only knew from books or movies. She knew everything that was happening in the village and often spoke so fast that you had trouble keeping up with her constant topic changes. Apparently, she was in the middle of bringing in her newspaper, although I had a feeling she had been waiting for me. It's about your father. She launched into it without any form of greeting. He always goes hunting in the woods, you know. Did you know they found another dead deer? Helga said even her husband, Dr. Novak, couldn't tell which animal tore the poor thing apart, and he's a doctor after all. But apparently, it was all torn to shreds. He had never seen anything like it, and was all torn to shreds. He had never seen anything like it. Then I thought, what if people are right, and there really is a ghost haunting our forest? Poor Pierre disappeared in the woods back then. What if his restless soul has returned to seek revenge on the living? It's only a matter of time before the first person falls victim to him. That's why your father should really think twice about continuing to take the risk. She couldn't go on. Good morning, Mrs. Richter. I heard Mom's voice behind me. She must have noticed our neighbor and come to my aid. Immediately, Mrs. Richter's attention shifted. Johanna, we've been missing each other lately. She pounced on Mom right away. She was like a vulture swooping down on a dead animal, a very unfriendly vulture with no sense of tact or politeness. I've been wanting to talk to you about your lawn for ages. Is your lawnmower broken? It doesn't look nice. The neighbors are already talking and I stopped listening. After quickly turning towards Mom to silently say thank you, I immediately set off. Mrs. Richter let it happen. She had found a new victim. Once out of sight, instead of running down the street to the bus stop as usual, I turned into a side street with a furtive glance over my shoulder. In the distance, I saw two figures standing. Clara and Lars were already waiting for me. "There you are." "We thought you were chickening out," Clara said with a teasing wink. I grinned at her. "Nonsense. I just had to shake off my neighbor." "Mrs. Richter," Lars chimed in. He was also grinning. "Well, then we can be glad you made it so early." Then our faces turned serious. I cast a suspicious glance at the forest, whose trees we could see at the end of the street. "So, are we really going through with this?" Clara asked. She furrowed her brow, as if she wasn't entirely sure about it. I nodded. "Yes, that is if you still want to join." The two of them nodded as well. "Good," I said. I hoped my nervousness wasn't showing. But what could possibly go wrong? After all, we had a weapon. Without further ado, I led them along the road into the forest. We only walked a short distance until we turned left behind, a sign marking a hiking trail, and disappeared into the thick foliage. I found the hollow tree stump right away. I immediately went over to it, rummaged around with my arm, and eventually pulled out an elongated cloth bag from its interior. I didn't say a word as I unpacked the weapon, but I gave my friends a meaningful look. This was the ultimate proof that I was serious about it. "You left the weapon here." "Unattended?" Lars asked, horrified. I shrugged. "Just overnight. I couldn't have smuggled it out this morning." "Hey, Dad, I'm taking your rifle to school, okay?" "Great. See you later," Lars made a grimace. I knew how irresponsible it was. But if we wanted to follow through with our plan, we didn't have any other choice. I wasn't going on monster hunt unarmed. My friends watched me with a mixture of unease and curiosity as I checked the barrel, loaded the rifle, and finally secured it. Of course, I kept the barrel pointed towards the ground away from my friends, just as Dad had taught me. "We're ready," I said finally. "Oh, okay," Clara replied. She had trouble tearing her gaze away from the rifle. "Where do we start looking?" Shortly after, we were on our way to the clearing where the old oak tree stood. We had left our school bags at the tree stump. I had told my friends what Dad had said to me at the breakfast table, and I had also mentioned that my neighbor believed the monster in the woods was the ghost of Pierre. We all knew about Pierre Jacobs. It had been about a year, maybe a year and a half, since he had disappeared. But even though there had been numerous unpleasant rumors about him since then, one of them being that he had died in the woods, Mom and Dad believed he had quietly moved away. He had never liked country life, and if he had died, his body or at least some remains would have surely been found by now, especially with the massive search operation the village had organized back then. No, I was certain. Whatever had killed the animals in the forest, it definitely wasn't his ghost. On the way to the clearing, I once again noticed how peaceful the forest was. Various birds started their symphony in the trees. A gentle wind caressed the leaves, carrying their voices through the woods. Somewhere in the distance, a woodpecker hammered against a tree. Occasionally, I could even hear the buzzing of insects, gradually heralding the arrival of spring. All of this was complemented by the gentle scent of damp earth, evergreen trees, and an occasional hint of flowers. Even though I rarely caught sight of their white and purple heads among the green grass, branches, and dry leaves. Suddenly, Clara stopped in front of me. Almost instinctively, she knelt down and held up a raised index finger to Lars and me. Then there was rustling in the undergrowth at some distance. I immediately turned in that direction, but aside from shaking branches, I couldn't see anything. I didn't lift the rifle. I looked back at Clara. "Did you hear something?" I whispered. She looked puzzled and couldn't tear her gaze away from the spot, even as she slowly stood up again. "I don't know," she said in a normal volume. "I think I saw someone." "Someone?" Lars asked. "Or something?" "Someone." All the alarm bells immediately went off in my head. If the man had seen me with the rifle, I knew, of course, that there was a risk of Dad noticing that I had borrowed one of his rifles, but it was still too early. We hadn't even had the chance to search for the monster yet. So I decided to go all in. "Hello." I called loudly into the forest. "Can you help us?" I wanted to pretend as if my father had willingly entrusted me with the rifle. Suddenly, Clara grabbed my forearm. When I looked at her questioningly, she shook her head. "I don't think he'll come back." The man was naked. "What?" Lars burst out. "You're kidding, right?" On the other hand, I couldn't help but grin. "Well, then we got lucky. If he was some pervert, he surely won't rat us out to our parents." But when I looked back at Clara, my smile faded. Her expression was dead serious. I don't know." His hands were dirty. It almost looked like dried blood. Lars and I exchanged serious glances. My thoughts raced. Dried blood. Was she actually trying to pull our leg? "Are you sure?" I cautiously asked. Sure that it was blood, I mean. But Clara shook her head again. "No," she admitted. We stood there silently for a while. At first, I stared in the direction from where the rustling had come. Then I looked back at Clara. Her eyes scanned the forest as if she expected to find the man somewhere. Before I could ask what was going on in her mind, she noticed my gaze. She looked startled, as if I had caught her doing something forbidden. Then her expression changed to one that asked, "Is there something wrong?" All in barely more than a second. "We should keep going," she finally said, turning away. "We're almost there." I furrowed my brow, but since I couldn't think of anything better, I silently followed her. Lars stayed close behind us. However, even though our surroundings hadn't changed much, the forest now gave me a different impression. The bird songs had lost their harmony. Now they sounded more like they were arguing with each other. Even the woodpecker's hammering sounded more brutal, as if he wanted to hack the entire tree to pieces. At least the scent remained as before. It had a soothing effect on me. At least until the sickly smell of decay mingled with it. We had reached the clearing. The old oak tree stood impressively as always in the middle of the clearing. Its branches reached out in all directions. If its crown hadn't already been enveloped in dense greenery again, you could have seen the decaying remnants of a treehouse in its branches.